My name is Ciso. Today we will continue with the fourth topic of the reincarnation series of videos I am doing. Why and how reincarnation scriptures were removed or left out from the Bible. We first need to go back in time to the first few centuries after the death of Christ and understand those times and the thinking of early church fathers. Contributions to the church made them very wealthy and powerful. And by contributions, I mean money in some form or another. These were very powerful people that had incredible control on societies. I once spoke to an old man who said something interesting. He made a point that was short and blunt. I don't know if it's completely accurate. It's just his belief, I guess. He said that if the church allowed people to believe in reincarnation, then people would stop contributing to the church. Because if people believed they had more lives to live later, they would not worry too much about the life they are living now, and thus not care about the church's teachings. And this is the reason the church vehemently opposes teachings about reincarnation. So, the principal motivating factor behind the church's ban on reincarnation is money. And money means power, something the church and other rulers of various empires about 2,000 years ago did not want to lose. This topic about references or scriptures being removed from the Bible is extremely complicated, but I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. The reason it's so complicated is because we have to go back in history several thousand years. Think about it. We are at this moment in the year 2022. 2022 years after the start of the calendar we use when it began with the year 1, even though the calendar wasn't invented in the year 1. The man who invented the calendar we currently use was a Christian monk named Dionysius Exiguus. By tracing historic events of the Roman Empire and the people that lived and died, he calculated that Jesus Christ was born 533 years earlier, making that year 1 AD. So Exiguus is also credited with dating the birth, or at least the year of birth, of Jesus Christ. Year 1 AD. Now, AD does not stand for after death, as some people incorrectly assume. AD stands for Anno Domini, which is Latin for the year of our Lord. It would be less complicated if we thought of it as the times of Christ, which we can say continues today. We are still in AD, now 2022 AD. Exiguus then documented, when he invented the calendar, that any years before the birth of Jesus would be called BC, before Christ. So 5 years before Christ was born, for example, would be the year 5 BC, and so on. Now things start to get messy when future historians were better able to study and retrace events and calculated that Jesus Christ was not born in the year 1 AD, which means that Exiguus was wrong. By using the calendar invented by Dionysius Exiguus, because we're now stuck with that calendar, they concluded that Jesus was actually born sometime between 6 BC and 4 BC, meaning Christ was born about 5 years before Christ. You see how this can get complicated? It seems to have been various coins issued by Herod Antipas, a ruler in Rome mentioned several times in the Bible, that solved the mystery of the Nativity, the birth of Jesus Christ. A coin made during BC, the times before Christ. Thus, future scholars and historians were better able to calculate when Christ was actually born. However, since the inventor of the calendar, Exiguus, was very close to being accurate within just a few years, let's use his calculations for now. So we are now in the year 2022 AD. That means Christ was born 2022 years ago. The Bible does give a hint for how old Jesus was when he began his ministry. Now, Jesus himself was about 30 years old when he began his ministry, as seen in Luke 3:23. A ministry that lasted approximately 3 years, meaning he died at about age 33. So let's say he died in the year 33 AD. Now, 14 of the 27 books of the New Testament of the Bible was written by Paul the Apostle, who met Jesus and converted to Christianity. He began writing his works in order to spread the teachings of Christ. This occurred during the first century, sometime between the years 30 or so and the year 100. With regard to the 4 Gospels of the New Testament, the Gospel of Mark was written about the year 66 to the year 70, Matthew and Luke around the year 85 to 90, and John the year 90 to 110, all within the first 100 years after the death of Christ, which means quite a few people may have contributed to the writings and made changes to the writings. Christian scholars believe changes continued over the following few hundred years. By the way, while the writers were all Hebrew, Christian Hebrews that followed Christ, they wrote everything in the Greek language, because that is the language that was used for writing back in those times during the Roman Empire. In the year 1978, a book was published and released called Reincarnation in Christianity by author Geddes McGregor. In that book, he describes the certainty that reincarnation was referenced in those original writings by the men whom followed Christ, and those writings remained intact for almost 500 years. Reincarnation was so prevalent in those scriptures that a Christian scholar known as Origen of Alexandria, who lived between the years 185 and 253, focused on the topic heavily in his own writings. The church burned and destroyed most of those writings. The capital of the Roman Empire was Rome. The capital of the Byzantine Empire was Constantinople, a place known today as Istanbul, and it was ruled by the Emperor Justinian. In the year 553, about 400 years after the death of Christ, an organization that consisted of 165 bishops was formed called the Second Council of Constantinople. Historical records show that the Second Council of Constantinople issued a verdict to declare any references of pre-existence of the soul, a soul that existed before it became part of a living human, what we now call reincarnation, as heresy. In other words, any discussions about reincarnation goes against the teachings of the church and will no longer be accepted as a part of Christian belief. This was now the law. According to the record, the Pope Vigilius, at the time was opposed to these changes, but he eventually relented to the powerful rulers and accepted the change. The writings of Origen of Alexandria and Basilides of Alexandria in Egypt, who also wrote about reincarnation, were all considered heresy. We have recorded in historical text what came out of that council. The Second Council of Constantinople and others that followed. One is referred to as the anathemas against Origen. What is anathema? A formal curse by a pope or a council of the church excommunicating a person or denouncing a doctrine. In other words, banishment from the church. In those times, it probably also meant prison or death. Number 1 on that document, the anathemas against Origen, states the following. If anyone asserts the fabulous pre-existence of souls and shall assert the monstrous restoration which follows from it, let him be anathema. In other words, souls did not exist in the spirit world before entering a human body. The soul is created when the human body is born. We also have on record what is known as the anathemas of the Emperor Justinian against Origen. And the first anathema reads as follows. Whoever says or thinks that human souls pre-existed, that is, that they had previously been spirits and holy powers, but that, satiated with the vision of God, they had turned to evil, and in this way the divine love in them had died out, and they had therefore become souls, and had been condemned to punishment in bodies, shall be anathema. I know that sounded a bit complicated. In clearer terms, anyone who says that humans had been a soul first, a spirit, but because they had committed sins in previous lives, they must now return in a new human body, reincarnation. Such persons saying this will be banished from the church. The question here then is this: why would the council issue such a verdict if the writings that would ultimately become scriptures of what would become the New Testament of the Bible had not spoken of reincarnation? Obviously, references to reincarnation and teachings of reincarnation in early Christian beliefs was happening, or the council wouldn't have been so adamant in getting rid of it. A massive undertaking then proceeded over the following years to literally hunt down and weed out all scrolls with writings mentioning transmigration of the soul, rebirth of the spirit, reincarnation. Writings that would eventually become part of the New Testament of the Bible when the books of the Bible were canonized, put together, if those pages are not found and destroyed. Now, following are some theories passed on through history as to why reincarnation was removed or left out of the Bible. One, there's the theory that had the church continued to allow belief in reincarnation, someday someone might declare himself the reincarnation of Jesus Christ and thus produce a mass following that would threaten those in power. 2. The slaves of Emperor Justinian were committing suicide in such large numbers. That is something declared as fact in history. And many may have believed in reincarnation, thereby believing that they can get themselves out of their current horrible situation and begin a better one in a new life. Of course, we know from Allan Kardec's Spiritist doctrine that suicide couldn't have helped and would likely make things worse. But let's continue. Justinian then may have decided that by stopping his slaves' belief in reincarnation, the suicides would be much less. 3. Obviously, money and power. Wanting to be held by those that ruled was only possible if people did not believe in reincarnation. The church wanted all to believe that the only way to salvation was by their teachings, which included their version of the teachings of Christ, and by scaring everyone to death by having them believe that anyone who does not follow their teachings will be condemned to the burning fires of hell for all eternity. Anyway, the reason I discussed calendars earlier and the birth of Christ is to drive home how long ago all of this took place. A long, long time ago. Even Geddes McGregor later stated that while there is every indication that early Christians strongly believed in reincarnation and writings about reincarnation were intended for the Bible, there is no actual proof of it. But there is no proof because the church and powerful rulers spent years, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years, almost 2,000 years ago, burning and destroying those writings. What was already part of the first publications of the Bible were removed, deleted. And scriptures that were to be added during the final canonization of the Bible never made it. Fortunately, however, they weren't entirely successful. Like I said earlier, they couldn't remove all of it. Those in power must have had a terrible time trying to figure out how to change writings in what would become the book of Matthew in the New Testament, when Jesus clearly told his followers that John the Baptist is Elijah who has returned. When Jesus said, "For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John, and if you are willing to accept it, he is the Elijah who was to come." He said John the Baptist is Elijah. Because you see, in the Old Testament, which was going to be a lot harder for those in power during the Roman Empire to make changes to, because the Old Testament had already been around for about 1,000 years. It states in the final book of the Old Testament, in the book of Malachi, that Elijah must return to this world for there to be a Messiah. When God said, See, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before that great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. So those councils banning reincarnation couldn't remove Jesus saying that John the Baptist is Elijah, because if Elijah had not returned, there is no Messiah. And if Jesus is not the Messiah, then there is no Christian religion, no Christianity, no Pope, nothing, nada. This will complete the fourth topic of this series. Be sure to subscribe to this channel so that you are alerted when the next topic, countries and religions that believe in reincarnation and how Socrates and Plato spoke of reincarnation, is uploaded to this channel. I would also enjoy seeing your comments, commenting on whether you agree with what I have discussed, or if you don't agree. Let me know. If you prefer to write to me personally, you can email me at kardecusa@gmail.com. Thank you, and have a blessed day.